My name is David Burch, and this is on disaster.
What I find interesting again
planning for
see
IT
is
services.
downward trend on reference statistics.
And to give you an overview,
and I'm not sure that
so you know what's coming up,
we don't all have that sort of thing.
I'm going to be talking a little bit about disaster planning, literature review, and what experts and people write on this are saying. When you're looking at drawing up a disaster recovery plan, the things that you need to be looking for. And then, since I'm from California, I was going to also talk a little bit about earthquakes, though it probably worked just as well if I were from Memphis or Louisville. I think Louisville has one last week, right?
If there's people out there asking questions,
and then Gary Hartman is going to talk about a flood at the University of Houston, and also is going to talk a little bit about dealing with FEMA. So after you've had your disaster and you're having to deal with some government agencies. And then Patrick Meyer is going to talk about fire.
Well, I was really intrigued,
and also about
because also
methods of fire suppression and fire
extinguishing. They both now
so that takes care of three. And then Famine, as John told us in the opening, he's run out of food money, so there is no food on Friday night. You're up here, you're on your own. That's the Famine. We've got all four of them.
Go to Westlaw now, and you look at their Westlaw.
Okay. One of the things about disaster planning, writing a disaster plan, is that it's a process, it's not paper. Too much of the writing surrounding disaster response planning concerns itself with the plan document.
I was kind of interested.
Disaster response planning is less about building a paper document than creating a demonstrable capacity for ensuring business continuity in the face of unplanned interruptions.
But I was more intrigued, so I phoned Lexus and I said,
nice
"Can you give me some numbers?"
Also, one of the other terms you will find,
since this started back in
if you're looking for information on this, is often called business continuity planning, as well as disaster recovery planning.
And I thought you'd give me Nova's numbers as well. So what you have
disaster recovery is talking about specific events such as floods, hurricanes, and earthquakes. Business continuation or business continuity is a broader range, including software viruses, hard disk failures, malicious attacks on systems.
By Lexus. So students with a question go to live reference. Our students, that's what they're thinking about.
According to Gartner Group, I was at a presentation last week and they gave this figure with a nice slide, but it turns out that the person doing the presentation had prepared that very late, and so in the handouts that slide was not included, and so I haven't been able to get his nice slide. But he was showing, according to Gartner, on computer data disasters, 40% are caused by software bug, 40% by human error, and then 20% by what we think of as a disaster.
We needed to look at personal records. How could we, as a
especially if you're doing the counting on
this is a
only 20% is what we normally think of as a disaster.
So I think we were sitting at AALS with Billy Joe.
Thinking in terms of what's a disaster, what's normal procedure.
Let's do it. And so what we did was we contacted a number of vendors.
A lot of what you should do as far as disaster recovery really is part of what you do as your normal planning process and your normal operating procedure.
With a company.
And you need to think about keeping a distinction between this. In other words, the idea that one server crashed, well, you can bring that up.
We will be able to, starting in July,
you need to know how long it takes to restore each service.
Download the software. It's a browser-based software.
Whereas when you have a multi-server crash, or loss of the computer room, loss of the building, then you would invoke some sort of disaster recovery plan.
I'll reference Librarian.
So your normal operating procedures should have your procedures on what you do to bring up all your servers, including how long it takes to restore each particular service that server provides. Again, what are you doing after disaster?
And we're going to cover
usually doing a whole lot of work while the rest of the organization is waiting around for the data to be recovered. And sometimes that can get to be a somewhat testy situation.
Back and forth.
Sometimes it's good if you have like really big disasters, because at least everyone knew something happened. And so, if there's no power and the 2 or 3 overpasses have collapsed from the earthquake, people aren't so concerned that email's been down for a day or two. On the other hand, when everything's running fine, and email goes down, an hour without email, people start getting real testy. So in some cases, the big disasters are better than the small.
Search or whatever. And to
So
me,
again,
the exciting part about
disaster
the process
prevention
is
part
we're
of
looking at this.
your regular
It's an
planning.
opportunity for two institutions to share an opportunity. It's also an opportunity for us to look beyond.
When
that.
we start thinking about disasters, one of the criticisms of disaster plans is they get to be too detailed.
So that actually we can send it out to a
That,
third party.
in case of earthquake, you do this, this, and this. In case of a major earthquake, you do this, this, and this.
We both have
And instead,
OLM programs
you should
that have
focus on the phenomenon. In other words, if a server is down,
with our distance to
we don't really care if it's down because the tower went off because there was an earthquake, or the power went off because there was a hurricane, or because it fell over because of an earthquake.
party. And
What we want to do in disaster recovery is focus on what does it take to bring that server back up. We don't care why it's down.
they'll be able to again push out our
Whereas in your normal planning process,
database.
your normal procedures, everyday procedures, you won't think in terms
think about it
of
from a library
earthquake, what can I do to prevent
library consortium.
damages?
we cover-
Flooding, what can I do to prevent damages? So you do think about these
If I have a virtual
specific
reference desk
disaster, but in terms of prevention. But when you're actually trying to formulate a plan on recovery, again, you don't really care why the server's down. You just need to know what your procedures are, who are the personnel responsible, who can actually, perform the backup.
Service set up
If it's only one person, what you do if that person can't come into the office.
by our users being able
Again, good policies don't rely on one person alone.
we have available, it's online.
So again, focusing on the symptoms rather than lack of server, lack of personnel,
That's an
lack of
exciting
connectivity.
prospect for us if we want to work together in this project.
So again, here are some examples of the different types of threats. Again, water damage, you don't care what the source is. Fire or heat damage, again, you don't care what the source, just how to recover from it.
In order to continue, I'm going to introduce you to some
Mechanical,
aspects of artificial
accidental,
intelligence
and then
that will help you
all
understand
others.
for the next
Okay,
speakers.
so when we're talking about the disaster plan, business continuity, what are the different systems and what is their
the
relative
artificial intelligence is
importance?
fascinating at the same time.
In other words, how long can the registrar
it's
system be
fascinating
down?
to dream of the many features that advanced computers will offer
Probably
us.
if it's in the middle of registration, if it's in the middle of trying to get grades out, if it's when you've got a lot of interviewing going on and people need to have copies of their transcripts, it may be primary duty to get registrar back up.
help students.
How long can the extranet webpage be down? How long can email be down?
Create a
How long
connection
can
so that
printing and
students,
file
when
services
they
be down?
interact with these
Again, if only one of these is down, it's not a big issue. But we're talking about when everything is down, what comes back up first, what do you put your limited resources and manpower into bringing back up first. That's what you're looking for in the disaster recovery plan. Okay, you can classify the functions, and these slides are available on a website. So I won't go through all the detail here, simply that you've got critical functions. One of the main things about critical functions is that there is no way of performing it by hand. And so you've got to get the computer back up to do it. Vital functions, again, there's no way of performing it by hand, but it's perhaps not as critical as the critical. Yeah.
I might be kind of just jumping ahead there, but
It has been said,
as far as like the last slide you showed about how long can these services be down,
you are fooled
there are also
by believing that
it would seem to me to be logical with the way that I kind of work things.
this
What
being in
systems
the
are
other
dependent on
side
other
is a
systems,
human
because
being instead of a
let's say
computer.
file
This
services
you will
is
know
down.
for sure that
Well,
it is
or
artificial
career
intelligence.
services is
A
down.
real
Well,
good
those
artificial
things might be linked together. If you don't get the file services back up, then that might have an NFS mount, and it doesn't matter if you get something up, it's not going to be up to you get the file service. You need to do things in a dependency
For those who didn't hear,
got together with
the point is on what systems to bring back up, you've got interrelated
and that's when
systems.
he came up with
And
the-
so, yeah, you can bring up career services right away, but if they're not able to print, in other words, our career services, not career services, registrar, they can bring up the
I put this here
transcripts.
because I found
But
that
there's no
in
printing.
1996
Or
how
the
these
database server's down.
students
Yeah.
So
also
it's nothing for the link that you could bring that website up that links to a database server. The database server.
So again, this
It's not
is
really
part
it.
of your disaster recovery planning, is knowing which things logically need to come back up first in order that the other things can come back up.
moving forward. He knew that at some point artificial intelligence will be as important.
So we
as
had
real.
vital, critical, sensitive, and then
I
non-critical.
believe that that's the case.
Again, the main thing on sensitive and non-critical is you're getting into areas that can be performed by
Recently, what
hand
used to be science fiction
within the
has become
information
science fact.
manually loaded back
The
into the
magical
computer once the
movies,
systems
we have been
are up.
exposed to the concept of artificial intelligence. The classic movie
Okay.
2001
So this
is a good example.
just sort of some musing, a little musing on my part on what I
Took all of
think
us into
will be some of the
fascinating
critical
world of
systems.
advanced
And the first one I put is payroll.
the story of future space exploration.
Because obviously,
This story
if a major
presented to
disaster, you're going to
audiences the
want
concept
everyone
of
to get in, to
artificial
work,
which you
try to
could
get
say
everything
is
back
the
up, and we'll make sure they're getting
software
paid.
powers virtual technologies.
And so what are the
Before the Discovery
systems that you need to
spacecraft
have
traveled
running
to
so
Jupiter,
that the payroll,
the HAL-9000 was
continue
not
to
a simple
function?
computer. It was
and
a
then
really
other
intelligent
related
artificial brain.
human resources
This
services.
computer interacted with the
I put the extranet web server as very high.
In the movie
Again,
by
thinking in terms of a
director
big disaster,
Hartman,
we're using our extranet web servers to keep people informed of what's going on.
Spacecraft.
So you have the notice on there. The authorities tell us that the crater where the law school formerly stood will be radioactive for the next 56 years. Do not drive to campus until further notice. You've got to get the word out, and we've been relying on the
Continue
extranet
to think
to do
with our
that.
imagination.
Financial systems,
Perhaps the best example
including the
is
library
recently,
integrated system.
when director Simon Wells shared with
you
us
need to
the
get these
virtual
back
librarian
up.
box in the movie The Time Machine.
Obviously, you want to be able to write checks,
mind
especially
that
with a disaster. If you've got to start paying for contractors coming to do cleaning.
to utilize this technology.
So your various financial systems, and again, it's really going to depend on if you're totally dependent upon the university system and they handle everything. So if the law school building is totally gone, all the systems are still working because they're elsewhere, or if in fact all your systems are local, or you're more of a freestanding law school and you run your own system. So it's important to get these back up and running.
Roy's presentation.
Then file and print
These
services.
sort of are born out of a couple of the things that he spoke about.
Again, unless a department
Technology
program
was
server
really,
needs to be given
MIT.
higher priority. And in file and print service, I would include,
project
if you're
called
using
the
DHCP,
Unity
anything you're using to
which
have
is
connectivity to the
parallel
outside world.
project to the Unity
Obviously,
project, in which they're mapping all the physical.
If you're wanting to use your extranet to get the message out, you need to make sure that people can actually get to your extranet.
And
through your internet.
I happen to have some friends at MIT.
And then
I
the
am
other
a
thing is to
technologist.
determine what procedures can you actually do
I
manually.
just happen to have a friend at MIT.
And so those can be at a lower priority
We don't have much to talk about.
with the idea that then
And,
that can all be loaded up into the
I
system.
happened to be in his lab
once
one day, and he was
systems are
working
up
on
and
this
running.
project, and he had a television screen.
Obviously, a lot of disaster recovery has to do with backup, and backup would be a program on its own.
This television screen.
Most of the, I've been going to several programs recently about business recovery and disaster planning. Almost all of them are sponsored by various companies that have various forms of hardware and software backup
He said, that's not
systems.
That's not a video. That's a virtual.
Probably with law schools,
But we actually
you don't
have
really need a
cardiologists
hot
come
site
in and
someplace
think
that
it's
would take over functions in case
My
something happened
background
to law school.
was in the motion picture business.
But there may be certain functions that you do
And
think would
so I
be
said,
sufficiently
Gee, could you make
important
the outside of the
that you would have arrangements either with the main campus or with another
And so I
school
said, oh yeah, we could do that. That'd
that
be
could
really
at least keep one
As
server
I've
of
come to
yours
learn now dealing with
that
technology,
would
this was in
could be
1995.
switched to that hot site.
It isn't quite as easy as,
Who has the authority to restore?
but we did it. And
Let's say
the concept
you've got your
that I
server,
had
it's
originally
running
was
fine,
to use it for special effects in the motion picture
but
industry.
there's a
Then
curfew in
19,
town,
late
or there's a
96,
curfew
97,
around a certain area,
and
and your IT people are on the other side of the curfew.
Ian said to me, gee, you know, what we've really created...
And let's say it's a disaster such as earthquake, so that in fact telephone service is not up.
Over the web.
So it's not really possible to dial in. to remote access.
And that got us all thinking. And the
You
web
have people who would be able to get in because they're within the curfew line.
And so we started to apply
Travel
the technology
travel disruptions.
to the internet. And
What would
we
happen
ended up
at
with
your
what
law
we
school
today?
if there was some sort of
But one of the things
failure?
that is
And
important.
the air traffic
I mean,
system
I
gets
see
shut down
this
for 4 or 5 days, and so you're in Chicago for the next 4 or 5 days.
And,
You would have your other members of your
Usually I
staff.
know nothing about your business. I
So
know absolutely
what are,
nothing about
who are the key people? What does it take?
I'm really in the
One
communication.
example in
You don't think of
program I went to where they were,